Chapter 10, Part 1, Lame Betsy. "We don't give to beggars," the girl said, trying to edge him out of the door again with her knee. "I'm looking for Emily." "Emily? There's no Emily here." "Emily Jarvis. She helps Rosie out in the kitchen." "Rosie? Who's she?" The girl was laughing down at him through her loose hair. "Rosie," Jim said. "You must know Rosie. She's got big arms and she don't like baking bread." The girl burst out laughing and looked over her shoulder at a woman who was sewing at the table. "Hear that?" she said. "There's no one here who don't like making bread, is there?" She laughed again, and the other woman laughed back in a mocking sort of way. Jim peered past the girl. Surely it was the right kitchen. It had to be. "You'll have to go, sonny," the girl said. "You've snooped around for long enough, I reckon." "There was a lady with a black, crinkly dress," Jim said, "called Judd. She'll remember." "Judd?" the other woman said. She put her sewing down. "She was the last housekeeper. She was sent away, and there was another woman too, the cook. I got her job. They were found hiding some street children in the kitchen, and his lordship dismissed them." "They were my sisters," Jim said. The drumming in his head was so loud he could hardly hear his own voice. "Emily and Lizzie. Please, miss, where are they? And where's Rosie?" The cook stood up and came to the doorway. She stood with her arms folded, frowning out at Jim. Her face softened when she saw him in the light. "Are they workhouse clothes?" she asked. "Please don't send me back there," Jim begged. "I wouldn't send my worst enemy there," she said. "You go off to bed," she said to the girl. "I'll put him on his way." The girl, who seemed to think it was all a fine joke, tweaked Jim's cap over his eye and took her candle up the stairs that led to the servants' quarters. The cook drew Jim in and told him to sit by the fire. "Lucky for you," she said. "His lordship's away for the night. If he was here, you wouldn't set foot over this doorstep, or we'd all be off to the workhouse. And lucky for you, I've decided to stay up and get this sewing done. Don't think you can pinch anything?" Jim shook his head, afraid to speak. "Don't you dare move from that spot." She put her glasses on the end of her nose and glared at Jim as he squirmed in his chair. The heat from the kitchen made him drowsy. He slid his hand into his pocket and felt for the last bit of cheese. It had gone, and he knew that the boy sweeping the road had pinched it. He tipped the last few breadcrumbs into the palm of one hand. Without saying anything, the woman put down her sewing and ladled some stew from the big pot on the hearth. She pushed the bowlful in front of him and winked without smiling, and Jim did his best to wink back. He ate in silence, and she sewed in silence, frowning at her needle as she rethreaded it, glancing at Jim over the top of her glasses from time to time. Gradually, he sank asleep. Sometimes during the night, he woke up and heard a soft little purring sound, and he knew that the cook was snoring into her pile of sewing. But then she would wake up with a snort, and Jim would drift away again. And at last they were both startled out of their sleep by a sharp rapping on the glass and a voice calling out, "5:30, time to be alive." And there was the knocker-upper hobbling past the window on his morning rounds, and Jim and the cook were awake for good. She sent him out to the backyard to fetch in water and sticks, and got the fire going and a pot of water boiling on the hearth. The girl came downstairs yawning like a cat and scratched Jim's head as she passed him. "You still here?" "He's going any minute," the cook said. "Soon as the dairywoman comes, he's on her cart and away, and he's never coming back, right?" Jim nodded. He wished they would ask him to stay. He liked the warm kitchen and the winking cook, and most of all, he liked her warm, sweet-smelling bread. If only Emily and Lizzie were here too, this would be a fine place to stay. They heard a bell ringing out in the street, and the cook picked up a couple of jugs. "Here's Lame Betsy now." Jim followed her out to the road and up the steps. Lame Betsy was leading a knock-kneed horse from house to house and selling milk from a slopping churn on the carts. This boy, the cook said, pushing Jim forward, is looking for Rosie, and if I'm right, she's a friend of yours, Betsy. The dairywoman grunted and pushed her hair under her cap. She ladled milk into the cook's jugs, her breath coming thick and slow. She's gone down in the world, Rosie Trilling has, she said. Nice job she had here, and now she's selling whelks for her grandfather, all because of a couple of street kids. This boy's sisters they were, the cook said, and Betsy set down the jugs and pushed her hair into her cap again. Were they now? Doesn't seem right, does it? She went on. Just for helping people out like that. Your sisters were they? They didn't look like street kids to me. Her hair floated free again, and she shook her head, thick grey strands of it dipping into the milk as she ladled it out of its churn. She was a fine woman, your ma, or so Rosie said. Jim couldn't look at her. He reached up to pat the horse's bony head, and it snorted and pulled back its lips, scaring him. What happened to Emily and Lizzie? He couldn't bring himself to look at lame Betsy. He was frightened of what her answer might be. She shifted her weight from one leg to the other. Don't ask me that, because I don't know the answer, she said. If you wants to climb on the cart, I'll take you to your Rosie. But where the girls is, I don't know, and that's the truth. Jim scrambled up onto the cart, slippery and sour-smelling with milk. The cook said something to the kitchen girl, lounging against the railings, and she ran down the steps into the kitchen. She came back up again with a small loaf in her hands. She passed it to Jim, laughing at his surprise. It was still warm. He tried to thank the cook with a wink, but she turned away. Don't you dare come back, she said. There's nothing we can do for you. Her voice had gone thick in her throat. God bless you, child. I hope he takes care of you. And she hurried away without looking back at him.